Hi, I'm Ruth Miller, and I'm the editor of the Library of Hidden Knowledge series. This is a series that I've been putting together with Beyond Words Atria, which is a division of Simon & Schuster, because they published The Secret, and everyone wanted to know what were those books that they kept talking about. So they asked me to do something that I've done for some other teachers that are from the 19th century, and that is to take some of the writings from these 19th century writers and make it make sense to those of us who live in the 21st century. So they started me with Wallace Waddles, The Science of Getting Rich, which is an odd little book, but it is the book that got Rhonda Byrne off her problems and onto her life, and it was wonderful. I wasn't so sure I wanted to do that one until I read the opening paragraphs, because what Wallace tells us is that who we are is such an integral part of the universe that the universe is structured so that we can be fulfilled. So our ideals, our talents, our gifts can be fully expressed and experienced. And he said, in our culture today, we need to have a little money to make that happen. So the money piece is secondary to the fulfillment piece. And when I found that out, I was happy to do that book. The second book they asked me to do was something called The Master Key System by Charles Haanel. And actually, that's the one that's been most popular so far because it's a real how-to. It talks about the process by which we begin to concentrate our mind, focus our mind on how we are going to bring something about in the world. Now, Charles Haanel was writing at the end of the 19th century, the early years of the 20th century, and he had a wonderful process that he used and moved people through. And then we explained in modern terms some of his examples, and we brought in some of the modern science and gave it some smaller headings. It was so effective that it hadn't been out 3 weeks before I got an email from Indonesia asking it to be translated in Indonesian, and it was out in Indonesia the next year. And that was cool. And then we got an email from China and an email from India. And we now have The Science of Getting Rich in Chinese all over China, and The Science of Getting Rich in Hindi all over India, and the Master Key System in Indonesian, as well as some other languages unfolding. Well, this year, they asked me to do some other writings. Those were the two that were fundamental to the movie The Secret. But they asked the next year, actually last year, they asked me if I'd be willing to work with Ralph Waldo Emerson's work. And that was a bit of a challenge. I mean, here is the great American writer, the great American philosopher. But I agreed if they would let me choose the essays. So this is a little book way back there, the Natural Abundance book, is the book that we did. And what we did is we chose 5 of Emerson's essays. We chose his compensation essay, of course, and his self-reliance essay, of course. And we also added in his essay, his very first essay called Nature, and one that very few people know about called Spiritual Laws. They weren't all of them my favorites, but they are important for every reader of Emerson, and of course, can't leave out the Oversoul. So these 5 essays we took, we have the original material in the back, so you can read Emerson as it was written, but in the front, we have my interpretation of his language and my breaking it down into smaller paragraphs. Some of Emerson's paragraphs are 2 pages long, and some of his sentences are 1 or 2 pages. So he's done some pretty extensive writing there. So those were the first books. And this year we've got 2 new books coming out. And one is Florence Scovel Shinn's The Science of Life, or The Game of Life and How to Play It, The Game of Life and How to Play It. And the other one is James Allen's work. And he's the one who did that thing called As a Man Thinketh. Well, we brought it up to date, took out that male gender bias, and we call it As We Think, So We Are. And we introduced some of his other material, which is a how-to. So at some point, we're going to talk about those 2 books. Thanks for checking in with me. I'll talk with you later.